Hi, this is a video response to Universo Distópico. I'm going to put a link to his channel in the description below. I recommend that you watch that channel because Universo Distópico talks a lot about his experience with role-playing games in Brazil and other things. And his video was about his personal experience with Warcraft. And this inspired me to create my own video with my experience, not specifically with Warcraft, although I will talk a lot about my experience with the Warcraft phenomena. It's more to be with Blizzard as well. So, well, basically I'm going to talk about what I loved about old school Blizzard and what I think influenced me and other things when it comes to role-playing games because of games like Diablo, StarCraft, Warcraft, etc. Well, back then, Blizzard kind of like opened my eyes to a new way in which themes developed in computer games, but also sort of like intertwined with role-playing games, tabletop role-playing games as well. Back then, it was a bit of the it was in almost in the middle of the satanic panic in Mexico, where everything related to demons, devils, and such was taboo, even though there were a lot of hypocrites, a lot of religious people that worship devils. But so when Diablo first came out, it was somewhat of a touchy subject. It wasn't well seen or accepted that you would play such things. But regardless, I always felt like intrigued about the dark theme. And eventually actually managed to get my hands on a copy. I purchased it at Sam's Club. And Diablo just felt like incredibly original, dark, sometimes sickening, and quite exciting gameplay experience when it comes to computer games. I loved the artwork. It was so like medieval. It was a world of bleakness, of ignorance, and a few heroes that were actually fighting against demons and Diablo, of course. And having the devil as a main antagonist in a video game, at least in Mexico, was somewhat of a shocker at times. And well, I played through the game, and I always found it quite fascinating that you read all those stories and background information in the instruction manual, and you saw these enemies and fallen angels and demons and whatnot, and you thought, oh, maybe that's just like a fluff or just to add a bit more color to the world. But because Diablo was a randomly generated world every time you played it, sometimes you actually bumped into those enemies, and it was quite surprising. You're like, oh, that's the guy from the book that it says that he was a fallen angel, etc. And it felt quite cool. And later on, I played StarCraft, and I started to notice some sort of like fatalistic tendency in the games produced by Blizzard, because StarCraft and Diablo both had some sweet and sour endings with great sacrifice done by one of the heroes. So you kind of notice that trend. But StarCraft, I love the story, I love the cinematics, I love almost everything. It was pretty cool to play it online as well. In fact, Diablo and StarCraft were my first experiences online playing computer games. Internet back then was really slow, so it was quite an experience. And later on, I actually got a bit into Warcraft. Funny enough, I didn't get into Warcraft until Warcraft 3, and it's one of the very few times where I got introduced to it because of friends. I'm usually the one introducing things to other people, but like video games, tabletop role-playing games and such. But this time I kept hearing about this real-time strategy game, that it had a very complicated storyline, that it has this character called named Arthas, and he was somewhat of a megalomaniac. It was a really complex and even treacherous character, and it caught my attention. I played Warcraft 3 and I fell in love with the story, and everything was just so amazing, and the world seemed so deep and realistic within the fantasy context. So I was hooked. I immediately purchased the Warcraft board game from Fantasy Flight Games, although it felt a bit. I didn't like it that you had to purchase an expansion in order for you to use the hero, so it was ridiculous because the board game was actually aimed towards the Warcraft 3 audience. They used the same illustrations and graphics, and I always felt somewhat disappointed that they didn't include the heroes and that you had to buy them separately. That's when Fantasy Flight Games started to fall from my good grace, so to speak. And later on, I got into World of Warcraft, and it was quite fascinating. Although I agree with Universo Distópico in the sense that when World of Warcraft came out, when it comes to the storyline, they kind of ruined it a bit. But I understand why, because they were trying to reach out to a wider demographic to gain more players, and they needed to adapt the storyline to accommodate all those thousands and thousands of players, and well, now it's probably millions, right? So later on, I kept playing World of Warcraft, and the world seemed so real, and it felt really cool to just to look at the world from the perspective of one of the characters, because as you all know, Warcraft was originally a real-time strategy game, and you felt like you jumped into you saw the world through the character's eyes, and it seemed so huge, and you felt at risk getting to through different dangerous and risky areas, depending on the territory of the Alliance and the Horde. So it was a really touching experience for me. But although I did not spend playing World of Warcraft as for too much for such a long time, because well, I had so many things outside of the game. I had to study. I had friends that didn't play World of Warcraft, so I didn't get into it as much as I would have liked to. And the thing that when you reached a certain level, everything was raids, and you needed to go into a dungeon hundreds of times until you randomly got the drop that you were looking for. So that didn't feel as fun to me, and the expansions didn't add too much to the fun in my opinion. I know that a lot of people still love World of Warcraft, but to me it felt like a lot of the fun was taken out with later additions, and it was somewhat of a pain if you didn't have like a good raid group. It was quite impossible to become more powerful with your character because of the items. But still, I have a lot of fun memories when it comes to Diablo, StarCraft, Warcraft 3, and the initial stage of World of Warcraft. And I think that actually that Blizzard actually influenced tabletop role-playing games subtly, but even so. So for example, Universo Distópico talks about orcs, about how they are somewhat stronger, bulkier, and I think more, what would you say, agreeable, friendly, that you felt sympathetic towards them. They are quite heroic at times, even honorable, and when Dungeons and Dragons first came out and started giving a boost to the whole orc phenomena because of Tolkien and such, those orcs didn't seem like too appealing. But when Warcraft came out, everybody wanted to play as an orc. So I think that had an influence on role-playing games today. Nowadays, it's quite common to create an orc as a character, as a player character. Back then, they were just enemies. So I think that Blizzard did a lot to bring new things to themes and storylines when it comes to role-playing games. So for example, with Diablo, you have a lot of modern role-playing games that are quite dark, like Shadow of the Demon Lord, Demon Souls, I'm sure there are a lot of many. I can't remember many of them right now, but it felt like Blizzard really gave a push to dark theme, and StarCraft as well. There were many role-playing games that I think that took inspiration with the Protoss and the Zerg, who are obviously also took influence from aliens. And when it comes to Warcraft, I actually never played the tabletop version of Warcraft and Diablo. I always wanted to play the tabletop version of Diablo, but even so, I think that it still had a lot of influence with role-playing games, especially because of the races, of how orcs became something that you wanted to play as instead of just killing them, killing orcs. And when it comes to science fiction, I also think that StarCraft influenced many modern role-playing games related to science fiction or even science fantasy. And so it's quite nice to see that I wasn't the only one inspired by those old school computer games. As Universo Distópico points out, it had a lot of fun memories playing Warcraft, and in my opinion, I feel that it was quite important for me as as I developed as a role player to have played Diablo, StarCraft, and Warcraft. They influenced a lot of my adventures and my perspective on role playing games. I think that both Diablo and Warcraft in their own ways, StarCraft more or less kind of, but Diablo and Warcraft broke a lot of stereotypes and taboos. Diablo introducing so many dark themes and not holding back. I remember the first time that I fought the Butcher. It was quite shocking when you entered his lair and you saw all these corpses and bodies of women decapitated and showing completely nude, and it felt wow, like nothing. I didn't see anything like that before Diablo. And Warcraft, the way they created that massive world, and they grabbed this paladin and that had so many, to say the least, questionable choices or life choices, and the way that they handled the whole orc tribe thing, it was quite amazing. Another thing that caught my attention, and I wonder if it had the same effect on me, is when Universo Distópico mentions in his video that he always played as paladins after Warcraft. And I actually think that had a bit of an effect on me. When I play as a player character, I usually play as paladin. I either play as paladin or as ranger or monk, but most of the time I've played as paladin. And I think that had a bit of an influence on me when I played Diablo 2. I really like the way the paladin played there. Even before that, I did like the whole protector of justice, champion of righteousness and good concept. Although I clashed with some game masters and dungeon masters because they were sort of like too tame. That the paladin cannot act in such a savage or cruel way and such. So when I run my games, and if one player wants to be a paladin, he only needs to fight against evil, and he can do pretty much anything that he likes, almost. So but I think that most of my attraction to playing as a paladin came from Diablo 2. And it's somewhat disheartening to me. I know a lot of players still like the Diablo as it is being handled today, but the Diablo 1 was really dark and gritty, and it felt like the Dark Ages. It was incredible. But then when Diablo 2 came out, I felt like they toned down the creepiness and the goriness and all of those sick elements a bit, and it felt like they were trying to make it more mainstream, and that was a bit disappointing. And Diablo 3, I didn't like the art style at all, and the gameplay also. I actually never finished it. I just tried it at a friend's house and didn't like it as much. So I think that Blizzard from back then and now there's a huge difference. mostly because right now Blizzard is more like trying to streamline things and more in the mainstream vein of things, so to speak. But even so, Diablo, StarCraft, and Warcraft, they left their mark on me, and I'm really grateful for that. And Universo Distópico, you did a great video. This is a very interesting subject. I wonder if there are more people that felt influenced or affected in a positive way with those video games. Well, thanks for watching my video. If you have any comments or questions, please let me know. See you later.